out of the foxhole. Yes, from the foxhole. Actually, it was a defensive position. Normally, we were very lightly equipped with rapid-firing weapons, folding stock carbines, that type of thing, rocket launchers or bazookas, as we might call them, anti-tank mines, things like that, on the defensive there, as opposed to being on the attacking part. And there, of course, not knowing fully the situation, we blocked all the roads so no more could come into the city of Bastogne with our outlying positions there. And some of the people who, of course, were in the city of Bastogne hadn't got any further than the city itself. And so it was one of really not knowing and being familiar with what was really happening, except the enemy was attacking and you wanted to stop them, and that part we did.
Our mission was to find the lead elements of the German advance. And they were led by panzer units, by tanks, by mechanized units. When we got to Rlph and we began to hear the sound of guns, we knew we were approaching the enemy. So we dismounted. And from that point, we were on the move. We never really dug in because we weren't attacked. We were looking to make contact with them. And it wasn't until later that we really had to dig in to stop a German advance. But initially, we were moving forward, and when we got a break, we would just lay down in the snow. Now, mind you, we went in with the clothes on our back. We didn't bring bedrolls with us. We had no blankets. No. We had no shower halves like we normally do. There really wasn't time for that, to prepare for the winter. And so we did the best we could to try and keep warm in this very cold weather. But we were on the move from one city into another. And then as we approached Chenot, we got word through the Belgians, through the underground, that the Germans were rapidly approaching Chenot and the crossing of the Somme River. There was a bridge over it. And we felt that if they got to that point and crossed the river, they would be hard to stop. So our mission then was to get to that bridge and into Chenot before they did and wait for them, because we were looking to make contact with them. And so we did. We moved out. And when we got close enough, they committed the 1st Battalion of the 504 to Chenot. And they moved into Chenot, and they met these panzer units head on. Now, we were lightly armed. We had some bazookas. We carried something I think will interest you. We call it a gammon grenade. And let me take a minute to explain that, because it's something we use that most people were not aware of. But it was something that was available to us. Now, the gammon grenade was made out of plastic explosive, what we call composition seed. And it could be molded and fit in and so on. But when molded with a firing device, it became a powerful weapon. And it had the capability, in some cases, of a 505. So you could use it against tanks if you carried them. Problem was, you had to carry this stuff, and you had to mold it and put a cover on it. And so they weren't widely carried. But I always carried a pocket full of composition seed and firing devices in case we ran into tanks and we had no other way of engaging them as lightly armed paratroopers. And so we had these gammon grenades, some bazookas, but up against them we had the Germans' 20-millimeter flak wagons, their 75-millimeter cannon, their machine guns, and all the rest. And so in terms of weapon and firepower, they greatly outweighed us, greatly outweighed us. So we suffered heavy casualties. At that point, in the early going, it was decided that to relieve pressure on the 3rd Battalion was making a frontal attack into Chenot. They'd take my battalion, the 3rd Battalion, and come around, circle around, and come in from behind, and hit them from behind, and take the pressure off them, and then maybe between us, we'd take Chenot. Although, I'm quick to say that the 1st Battalion did all the heavy work, suffered all the casualties, and it was bloody. We had our fair share, but I don't want to be taking credit where credit is due to another battalion. Anyway, we did circle around, And I remember coming around through an open area, and then to come down a hill which led down to the river. We'd come down this hill, and we reasoned that if we got down there, we could get into Chenot from the back. We started down this hill. We came in a line of skirmishers, 2 companies initially. The skirmishers spread out coming down this hill. And the Germans opened up on us with flak wagons that were in Chenot. And the flak wagons, they had the 20-millimeter shell, would explode. And fragments would hit guys. And we were losing people coming down this high ground and were wounded, and they were moaning and groaning. The initial reaction is, for you when you're being fired, is to take cover. Initial reaction, always was. Yeah. To go behind the hill. And most of the units did, but I had advanced with a group of my men, the platoon, forward quite a ways, and we decided instead of going back over the hill for cover, we would charge down in the face of the enemy and see if we could engage them. And after all, it's a war. You don't win the war by seeking cover. You seek your enemy. And when they're in sight and you know where they are, you engage them. That was always my motto. But I was a platoon leader. I never commanded anything, but I led a lot of men. Yeah. And so I led there. And we headed down, got down near the river, and apparently we came in under their fire, and we got down the river. There was some heavy brush along there. We dove down there and took cover. There were 5 of us. And we stood there, or we waited there. We couldn't go back up the hill. If we fired from there, they'd unload on us. We were in a precarious position. So I gave order, hold up, we held up. We stayed there, we didn't do anything. In the meantime, the Germans were moving armor in and out, and all of this was going on. We could see them just across the river, but we had no way of engaging them. And there was only a handful of us. Then I remember coming down the bridge was probably the better part of a German squad, maybe 5 or 6 guys from an anti-tank unit or whatever it was. And they were digging a big hole to put in an anti-tank gun that would have protected the approaches up on the hill and everywhere else. And they were digging this, and we watched them. And we watched them, and they were talking. Sergeant came out of that hole, crossed the bridge, and came over, looked around. He didn't see us, and went back. And I watched all that. And it was starting to get dusk. I didn't know what had happened to my company. They retreated back behind the hill, regrouped. I didn't know where they were. We didn't know. We knew absolutely nothing, except that we were kind of caught in a very difficult situation. But the terrain was such that the river bent around, and if you could follow the river around, you'd get around behind this high ground. And I checked that all out. And finally I decided, we passed the word along. On my command, fire. Now, I never had to give a firing command. When you're in combat, you fire. Nobody has to tell you to fire. But because we had concealed our position and didn't want to bring fire on us, I said, fire on my command. We watched these fellows, there were 8 of them, that were digging, they were talking, unaware that we were just across the river from them, putting in this gun and going about their business. And on my command, we opened fire on these guys. And they dug that hole deep enough so they all fell in it. They were digging their own grave, literally. The minute we did that, the Germans picked up our position and started at us with flak wagons into this brush. And it was breaking off. Man in front of me got a hit, was limping along, couldn't make it. I had to pick him up and drag him along. And eventually we did get behind and rejoin the company. And then later we regrouped as a company and came down the hill and did get into Chenot. Now, Chenot was significant in the Battle of the Bulge for this reason, for one reason. It was the first town retaken from the Germans that they had taken. They had taken Chenot, yeah. And we retook it from them. And so, you know, between us, we were involved in stopping the Germans. Yeah. Then after we did stop them in there, and they pulled back and headed somewhere, we then pursued them.
As a matter of fact, as a paratroop unit, we were always surrounded, what have you, so that part didn't bother us, so on. Of course, we were not armed with tanks or vehicles or anti-tank guns or tanks or anything of that nature. We were a light, fast-firing type of units. And so we had our rifles and our hand grenades and our anti-tank mines and things of that nature, and our explosives, composition C, 25 pounds of it, as a matter of fact, with each demolitionist, so we could mold that around, actually throw it on the engine of a tank as it passed us, and blow the engine on the tank to get it out of commission of the Germans. Yes, we did. And by molding a ball of that, and putting a fuse and blasting cap in it, then we could throw that on the back of a tank where the engine was and would blow the engine of the tank so it would incapacitate the tank. Actually, I was on the second story of a building there at that time with field glasses trying to cover the roads and see what was coming. And the artillery and bombing of the building began to fall down. So I jumped out of the window of this building, since it was crumbling, and into the street of rubble below from this building. And actually, I broke several toes in my foot, but that was so minor you didn't bother with that until years later I had it repaired.
Let me make one point regarding composition C. When you fly and you go to the airport, you take off your shoes. Why? Because the terrorist had composition C, went in the men's room and was putting it in around his shoe. And he had a way of detonating that, and he was going to blow himself up in that plane. And that was composition C that we used to knock out as an anti-tank weapon. Yeah. So when you go and take off your shoes, just remember it was the shoe bomber that they got that was molding it into his shoe. And now here I am, a World War II veteran. The loyal fought for my country. I got to take off my shoes because they don't trust me. When you recall the Christmases past, they get together, the families, the presents, the trees, the joy, the families, and it was a time of bringing people together. Yeah. In the combat zone, there were no holidays. Death does not take a holiday. Death does not take a holiday. So Christmas was like any other day, each side seeking to gain some advantage, but nobody letting their guard down. I could hear, by listening carefully, between the sound of shells overhead and impacting, strains of Silent Night. Yeah. And Oh, Come All Ye Faithful. Yeah. Yeah. It gave me a funny feeling in the forward position of our own troops, and in front of me are the Germans who are trying to kill me, and I'm trying to do the same with them. And the carolers back there are singing, on this holiest of nights, Silent Night. How would you ever forget that? Yeah. How would you? Because it tells you something about ourselves as mankind. Sure, we believe in God. Sure, we're Christians. We believe in all these things. We believe in the Bible. But we're still out to kill each other to gain advantage, even on Christmas Eve. We had stopped the Germans, you know, and were in pursuit. And we got word where the lead elements were at. And we tried to make contact. We were trying to make contact with them. And I remember it was dark on Christmas Eve, and we pushed forward and finally decided we would occupy some, as you said, our terrain was trail hilly. We would occupy some high ground, get situated where we could command the terrain around us and wait for the Germans to come through. So we marched all that night through that deep snow, got up on top of this mountaintop, kicked away a little snow, because there was no way we could dig into that ground, but somewhere where we could rest or sit down or do something to await the German arrival. Then we get word that we're moving out. This was not a good defensive position. So we pulled back, pulled out of there, and headed for a town called Bra, B-R-A. It was on the line that we had drawn in 82nd. Bra, Fa, Chavan, and others that we occupied. That was where we were going to make our stand against the panzers that were, and the grenadiers.